Oh, this case brings up so many issues, and to talk about some of them, let's bring in Patrick Watson, an assistant professor at the University of Toronto Centre for Criminology and Socio-Legal Studies. And Patrick, we have a shocking, terrible murder here. We have the Premier of Ontario really saying that it's an example of problems in the justice system, using very strong language. Well, what stands out to you when you look at this case?
This is a very serious incident. It requires a very fulsome response from not just the criminal legal system, but society at large to condemn these types of acts. I'm thoroughly confident that we will see a rapid response from York Regional Police, that this will be investigated, and I think it will be brought before the courts in very short order.
You know, one of the things that frustrates me as a journalist, and I talk about it quite often on this program, is that the system often doesn't release many details about a case. Mm-hmm. And I understand you don't want to have a negative effect on the investigation. You don't want to have a negative effect on the ultimate trial. But in the meantime, you have this vacuum, and it can get filled by anger and rumors or politics. And so how do we balance that, getting information out to the public in a way that doesn't prejudice investigations and cases?
It's an incredibly difficult question to answer, and I'm not sure I would be able to provide, or any other professional criminologist would be able to provide a sufficient answer. I think as a community, we need to sort of reflect on what we view criminal justice to be and think seriously about how our criminal legal system should function. And that does typically, at least in the formation of our criminal legal system, involve due process and ensuring that the police officers find the individual who is responsible, that person is tried with due process in a court of law, and that might require some patience from the public. It's really not our obligation to understand every single thing about every single crime that occurs. We do have a right to understand what has occurred when we're about to incarcerate someone. And these are very important, that the public is aware of how this process works and what types of delays they might be expecting.
Yeah, and I knew, as I asked you the question, it's a very, maybe an impossible one for us to answer, but I think philosophically it's worth thinking about at least. And here's another thing that I think is important to think about. There is a feeling on the part of a number of people, I don't know how many, but a number of people, when shocking crimes happen, that their society is unsafe. And it is hardly a comfort to them to hear what the statistics might show in terms of violent crime being down, let's say. It just feels instinctively like crimes like this make the community unsafe. So you're a professor, you're a criminologist. How do you address that?
It's a perfectly natural response. It's one that criminologists have been familiar with for easily 3 decades, that our perception of crime often doesn't mesh with the realities of crimes recorded by the police or crimes known to police. That said, in southwestern Ontario in particular, we have seen a certain increase in violent crime over the last 2 or 3 years. One of my colleagues, Professor Scott Wortley, has speculated that this may have something to do with the transition in the drug trade that's occurred with the decriminalization or legalization of cannabis. And I think that's about as good of an explanation as I've seen elsewhere. We've also seen some very cutting-edge research lately on how more strong drugs, especially fentanyl, have really changed the drug trade. That's not necessarily what we're talking about in the Vaughan case. We don't have enough details to know for sure. But there are some very interesting dynamic changes in how the drug trade is operating as a result of specifically fentanyl and its impact on drug dealers and drug users.
We have just about a minute left. Another big and difficult question that defies easy answers, but I'll ask it. Sometimes judges will say in their sentencing, and we're a long way from sentencing here, but they'll say this is a case. We want to bring in specific deterrence for the accused, but general deterrence to society. We want people to know that we will not accept this kind of crime. Do you think courts need to do more to deter future criminals from doing crimes?
From our understanding of how criminals act, criminologically speaking, deterrent effect is not something that we see significantly. You see the highest sentences in at least the OECD or the developed countries in the world, in the United States, and yet you still see very, very high crime rates and very, very serious crimes being committed in the United States. If it were the case that deterrent effect worked, then you would see virtually no crime in the United States, and yet it has virtually the highest crime rates of any developed countries or countries with a sophisticated criminal legal system. So deterrence does have a function, and denouncement has a function, and these are important functions. But I don't believe that you're going to see a strong correlation between harsher judgments and harsher sentences and reductions in these types of crimes.
Yeah, another example I often think about is countries that give the death penalty for people who smuggle drugs, and yet people continue to smuggle drugs in those countries. Patrick, there's so much to talk about with these issues, and hopefully we'll get a chance to connect again.
My pleasure.
Patrick Watson is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto's Centre for Criminology and Socio-Legal Studies.